Hello, welcome. We're going to be talking about developing with small teams. All right, here we go. So what is this talk about? It is primarily going to be talking about the development of a game I worked on called Pentiment, which I will get into in a bit. I'm going to be using this game as an example of talking about how to work with small teams. Obviously, this is variable. I was talking to a friend just before this who had a friend who said 1 or 2 people is a small team and like 5 or 6 is big. So it's all relative, but I'm kind of talking about 3 to 13, 5 to 15, that's small. I want to go over what I believe are some of the best practices and pitfalls that I've learned on that project. I mean, I've worked on games that are over 100 people. I've worked on games that are as small as this. So some things to take away to your own projects. I'm really struggling with this, okay. This is primarily oriented toward newer developers, but hopefully if you're a more experienced developer, there are still things here that will be applicable to you on your own projects. So, if you don't know who I am, my name is Josh Sawyer. I'm the studio design director at Obsidian Entertainment. We are located in Orange County, California. We've been around since 2003, and we make almost entirely role-playing games. I started my career at Black Isle Studios in 1999, where I stayed until just before it shut down in 2003. From 2003 to 2005, I was at Midway San Diego, and then I went to Obsidian Entertainment, which is primarily founded by ex-Black Isle people, and I've been there now for 20 years, which is kind of crazy. So a little bit of background on Pentiment. I might refer to it as Missouri at various points. That's the working title of the project. It entered pre-production in September of 2019. This is before COVID was really a thing that anyone knew about. We entered production in May of 2020, so right as lockdown started and we all went home. We shipped the game in November of 2022. So pretty much all the development was handled during COVID lockdown, and many members of the team didn't meet until we actually had our launch party, which is kind of crazy. We had 5 developers in pre-production. And that was a producer who also did design work, myself doing design and writing, a programmer, an animator, and our lead concept artist. We had 13 developers at peak production. That kind of, I'll show you a little chart in a bit. It's a little tricky because some people came and left or went over to other projects and came back, but 13 developers at peak. So this is what our team structure looked like for a pretty good chunk of production. This is color-coded. I'm colorblind, so hopefully I did an okay job color coordinating this. Most of the developers, even if they weren't working in office, were still working in the same time zone. So most of the people on the team were working in the Pacific time zone. Then we had a few people that were in Central, which is 2 hours offset from Pacific. And then we had people in Western, Central, and Eastern Europe. So overall, we had people in quite a few time zones, and it was a 9-hour span overall. So I did want to talk a little bit about how small projects are still like big projects, because I don't think it's a wholly different beast working on something small versus something big. They still require organization. Big projects do require a huge amount of coordination. Obviously, in some cases, you have literally hundreds of people that are working around the world, multiple studios, but small projects still need to be organized. They should still follow distinct phases of development. These are the phases of development that I work with, that Obsidian typically works with. There's pre-production. That consists of a prototype and a vertical slice, or multiple prototypes and a vertical slice. Or if your vertical slice does not go well, multiple prototypes and multiple vertical slices, it happens. Then production milestones. This is the majority of the game's development. This is where you're making most of your content. Your alpha phase, where you're sort of locking down what your content is in total. Your beta phase, polishing things, and then release. And I'll get into all this stuff in detail. So I want to talk about the importance of pre-production. I believe that while a good pre-production does not ensure that you will have a good production, a bad pre-production pretty much guarantees that you are going to have a really bad production phase. Because if you get the pre-production wrong, you kind of just don't know what kind of game you're making. This is where your vision is established. So you're making prototypes, you're trying to figure out what is the type of game that we're trying to make. And then once you've figured out this is the type of game we want to make, you have your vertical slice where you integrate all those different features and ideas into a vertical slice, and that should solidify your pipelines. So to me, pre-production is where you figure out what type of game you want to make and how you are actually going to make the game. This is also ideally when your scope is determined. So when you go through your vertical slice, you should have a sense of how much content you can make in a given time at a given level of quality. And based off of those metrics, you should be able to look at what you have planned for the rest of the game and then scope accordingly. Usually this means cutting down. I have yet to see a case where it means adding things. But yes, usually the vertical slice will tell you this is what you can actually do at this level of quality. The quality might improve, but it is very rare that the speed actually gets faster. It's very important that the team share a vision. I mean, this is true on any project. Leadership, I will say, though, is less important on small teams. When I've worked on larger teams, I have to kind of constantly be hovering and going to a bunch of people and making sure that, I'm kind of correcting things or giving guidance a lot. But on a small team, the communication is a lot easier. Well, I shouldn't say easier. There are a lot few people to communicate with. And generally speaking, people share a lot more responsibilities, and there's higher visibility of what's going on. People have more autonomy. If you are working with 3 people or 5 people or 6 people, there are going to be people who are splitting roles. There are going to be people who pick things up when other people just can't handle the workload. That's just part of working on a small team. On a large team, you can have people that are very dedicated to specific things, sometimes extremely hyper-specific things. That doesn't really happen on a small team. But the shared vision is still critical. People have to still understand this is the game that we're making. We get it. This is how we're making it. We're all on the same page. You should be defining your vision together. This is less of a thing on larger teams where, from a practical perspective, if you have 100 people, not everyone is going to be necessarily bought in on the vision. That would be wonderful. I have yet to see that ever happen. But you do have to define your vision together, especially if it's a very small group of people. You should keep returning to that vision. You should have a statement of what your vision is, and you should keep coming back to it at specific stages. So if you say, this is the game, this is the vision that we're trying to achieve, at the end of your prototype, you should ask yourself, is this still the game that we're trying to make? At the end of vertical slice, is this still the game that we're trying to make? And so on. So at each phase where you reach an end, you look back and say, is this what we're still doing? And if it isn't, do we need to correct it, or has the vision actually changed? Sometimes along the way, you realize the game that we set out to make is not the game that we want to make anymore. That's okay as long as everyone understands that. So the vision for Pentiment that I had was Pentiment is a narrative adventure game with light role-playing game elements set in 16th century Bavaria and featuring a distinctive art style inspired by the Northern Renaissance. You play Andreas Mahler, a university-educated artist who attempts to solve a series of murders in the fictional Kearsarge Abbey and town of Tassing over 25 years. So that's pretty high level, vague in some ways, specific in others. So what is not in this vision? What the music is going to be like. All of our weird fonts. If you've seen Pentiment, we got a lot of weird fonts and a lot of strange writing effects. How long the game is, there's nothing in the vision about that. How many characters will be in the game. How many animation rigs we're going to use. Whether or not we're going to have voiceover. We did not because we had over 100 characters. And how many languages the game would be localized into. That doesn't need to be part of the vision, although you do need to figure that stuff out. But there is a clear vision that the team was able to rally around, and then everything else was sort of figured out as we went. So to talk about prototype and vertical slice, Prototypes are for showing what you are making. This is executing on the vision that you're talking about. This is not really about figuring out how you're making things. That's the vertical slice. So when you make prototypes, you should be, don't worry about doing them perfectly. Your prototype should be quick and dirty and really get to the point, showing the type of gameplay that you want, the sort of style that you want. If you are trying to do it perfectly in prototype, you're doing it backwards. You want to try things as quickly as possible and iterate on them as quickly as possible so that the team can say, cool, we got it, we understand what we're trying to make. However, in vertical slice, you have to be extremely focused on making sure that your pipelines are really being developed very thoroughly. The vertical slice is how you are making the rest of the game. If it is very different from how you plan to make the rest of the game, you are not ready to go into production. My rule that I use is that 85% of your pipelines should be about 85% done before you go into production. And where did I get this from? I made it the fuck up. I just think from my experience that it is a good idea, because the principle is that you're not going to get 100% of your pipelines figured out. Like on some games, your pipelines aren't figured out even when you're shipping the game, which is ridiculous, but sometimes true. However, I think it is irresponsible to not figure out the majority of your pipelines mostly before you go into production. You can figure out some details later. Like there's always something in, let's say, an animation pipeline where there's one step where it's like, this is a little clunky, we do need to improve it. That doesn't mean you have to stop everything and figure it out before you move on. Figuring out the basics is very reasonable, and it is very good, and it is very helpful to the team. And this is an important thing to remember. When you get into production, if you have people working on pipelines, they are not making features, and they are not making content. So production is where you're supposed to be doing all of that stuff, or at least like the features that are sort of like auxiliary to the experience that you're creating. So working on pipelines in production is sort of antithetical to the point of being in production. We had a lot of fonts in the game. These were very important. I gave a whole talk at GDC this year specifically about fonts. We prototyped these very early because I knew we wanted them to be extremely fancy and very robust. The end solution for this did come after vertical slice, but the majority of the principles were figured out well in advance. So there were small things, but they weren't critical or risky. They were just little details that we needed to work out. It was a very smooth process, but it was labor intensive. I'm not going to go into detail, but one of the things is every letter was actually written stroke by stroke, and so we had to mask every stroke in every character, which was like 2,800 glyphs. That was all done by hand. But we figured out in vertical slice how to do it, and then we just said, this is just time, and so we will get it done. In contrast, the 3D scenes are one of the things that I'm responsible for not figuring out. I had a vague idea that we would have some 3D elements. This is one of them. This is sort of the front end of the game, which is in 3D. I had a general idea of what I wanted for it. I also knew that I wanted the journal to be a 3D space. Most of the rest of the game is 2D. We didn't have a staff for that. Our animators were 2D animators, primarily. We sort of had the tech, but not really. Oops, sorry. And ultimately, not figuring this out wound up being the most disruptive thing in the game. I'm still glad that we did it, but we were figuring it out almost when we were shipping the game, which is kind of ridiculous. So, working together and team fit. I think this is very important for small teams. You can't avoid anyone on a small team. If you're kind of annoyed with someone on a big team, great. Like in many cases, if you don't have to interact with them on a daily basis, yeah, it's fine. Or maybe it'll blow over. But on a small team, you're probably going to interface with everyone every week, if not every day. You don't have to agree on everything. Like, they don't have to agree with me. I don't have to necessarily agree with them as long as we agree to do specific things. You do have to get along. You have to be civil and be able to actually work together. Yeah, and that's the thing. More than on larger teams, day after day, you're going to be working with and talking to the same people over and over and over. Many people, usually everyone on the team winds up doing everything, or a lot of things. Small games are still big. It's like any game, anyone who has shipped a game knows that there's a phase where you go like, there is so much in this game. It doesn't matter how big it is. You're just like, there's something more to do. There's another thing I have to fix or finish or implement or revise. So even small games in the end are big. And there are just tons of things that need to be done. So everyone has to be very flexible about what their job is. Again, on larger teams, sometimes people can be very, very strict and territorial about slapping people's hands. If narrative designers should not go into the quest editor or do X, Y, and Z, you kind of have to get over that on a small team. You have to kind of accept, obviously people have to be respectful of other people's work, but you have to have an environment where people feel like there is flexibility and you're all just pitching in to get things done. So we had a lot of shared responsibilities on Pentiment. So for example, I was responsible for most of the UI mockups, all the system design, all of the game data management. There's not a lot of game data, but there was enough to manage, like all of our glossary entries, and figuring out how the font stroking worked with our programmer. Zoe Franznik, one of our writers, she is a Latinist. We had a fair amount of original Latin in the game, so she is responsible for proofreading all of that stuff. Also, she did a lot of research on Roman colonial things because that's a big theme in the game. Our two programmers, Brett and Nicola, did a lot of minigame prototyping and iteration. This is a lot of stuff that I sort of handed over to them. Like, I couldn't sit and really design every single minigame with them. I would give them a general idea, and they would figure it out. And they have good game design sense, and in some cases better than I did. So they did a great job. I had to leave the prototyping to them. Our lead artist, Hannah, took over all the lighting. There was a lot of debate for like 6 months about what our lighting solution would be and who would do it. And in the end, Hannah just volunteered. She was like, I'll do it. I'll just do it all. I'll do every light in the entire game. And that made it very simple. So in addition to all the artwork that she was doing, she lit everything as well. And then one of our artists, Sujin, she did all of our food scenes. And while normally I would do historical research or we had historians that would consult, Sujin just decided she would do all the historical research about the food herself, which is great. And people love the food in Pentiment. So on a small team, it's hard to justify certain positions because you have so few people on the team. One of the questions that comes up is, should we have a producer or not? This is one that even came up on our team. Thankfully, I had a really great producer as my lead producer, Alec Fry, who is very flexible and can do lots of different things. Producers do important work. They figure out your schedules, they track work, they organize meetings and run them. All the licensing and contracts, if you don't have someone at a higher level in the studio, they're usually handling a lot of that stuff. And then coordinating with your publisher, or in our case with Xbox, who is our publisher, who owns the studio. Sometimes it can be hard to justify this as a full position, so it kind of comes up, should we even do it or not? But this work, all this work that I'm talking about, somebody is going to wind up doing that. If it's split across people, it has certain risks. If you have a producer, there's other trade-offs. Oops. Hey. So here are some options for producers on small teams. So you could have a producer, but they do other work. Ideally, this is supplemental work because production work often comes out of nowhere. Producers usually are dealing with external vendors or publishers or things like that. So if you have producers also doing kind of load-bearing work that other people depend on, it's very risky because they're going to have to stop and shift gears and then come back to it. In our case, Alec Fry did a ton of supplemental work, and he was extremely helpful. You could also have a producer position, but it's part-time. So this is not a full-time position. It's something that someone does 20 hours a week, 10 hours a week is probably too little. But they check in every once in a while just to avoid scheduling issues, to look over what people are doing and make sure everything is going smoothly. Sometimes I've seen a case where you have a producer, but all of that stuff is handled on the publisher side. So if you're working with a publisher, they will typically have a producer that is interfacing with you. However, they have their own workload, and often their priorities are not your priorities. So you are trying to get the game done the way that you want it to get done. The publisher is not necessarily going to see things the same way, so there are trade-offs and risks with that. And the final way to do it is kind of what I said, which is you don't have a producer, but everyone on the team shares that responsibility. You should still have one point of contact for external sources, because otherwise it gets extremely confusing about who has been talked to by whom at what time. And yeah, it doesn't have to be equal responsibilities, but again, all that work, all the contracts, all the scheduling, all that stuff does need to get figured out by somebody, so you have to figure it out. We had two producers on Pentiment, Alec Fry and Mary Mutter. Alec had already been a full-time producer at the studio, so he just transitioned over from another project. He did design work. He set up a bunch of our maps, cutscenes. He did a ton of our font stroking. The nice thing about the font stroking is that he could basically pick it up in 5 minutes and do a bunch of them and then stop whenever he needed to. So it was great piecemeal work for him to do over the course of the project. We weren't waiting on him. We just knew eventually it all needed to get done. And he also helped set up a lot of our music, which was very helpful. Mary was a design intern, and she helped us during production before moving to another project. But basically, Alec offloaded some things to her to free up his time for other things. The production phase, this is where the majority of your stuff actually gets done out of pre-production. So you do want to document everything before you start. I could give a whole talk just on my opinions on documentation, but generally speaking, don't over-document. Keep your communication very focused. If you develop documents, keep them short, focus on goals. You want to do things that are helping the team, not wasting your time and wasting their time. I'm sure everyone in this room has written a document that you know almost no one on the team, if anyone on the team, has ever read. So you should focus on writing things that you think are going to help people, that they will actually read. Energy should be focused on features and content, not pipelines. Remember, if you're in production, you should have figured your pipelines out. If not, please go back and finish your vertical slice. So the whole point of documenting is to be clear. And too much information can actually make this not clear, and it can be a barrier to people reading what you wrote. Clear and comprehensive, not exhaustive. Like you truly, especially on a small team, do not need to be exhaustive. Remember that you have a small number of people, so if someone needs to ask a question, you're right there. You're a lot more accessible than you might be on a 100-person team. Do not over-document. Small teams can communicate informally. We communicated mostly on Slack. We would have some meetings on Teams because Teams is better at certain things than Slack. But lots of informal communication can work very well. But just make sure that when you decide things that they're written down, don't assume that people understand what's happening. Teams can change, so documentation is important. For example, the main writer that I worked with initially on Pentiment, Kate Dollarhide, she left the project for a while to work on something else. And then I had 2 people come on, and those people were coming on in production. And so I had to get them up to speed, and I had mistakenly just said like, it's just going to be me and Kate for, the next 2 years, but that did not happen. So I needed to actually document that stuff. And then later, Kate came back, but the new writers and I had figured out new things, so we had to make sure those were documented so Kate understood the changes that had happened. So teams can change, so document things so that there's at least some record and people know what's going on. Our documents on Pentiment. So a general rule I have on every project is that every design document, every document really that is about a feature or an approach to something, has 2 types of goals. There are dev-facing goals, meaning I have a goal that is affecting how we author things, how we make things, the performance. Like we want to make sure that we can write X amount of lines per day. We want to make sure that the localization pipeline is as smooth as possible. Those are dev-facing goals. And then there are player-facing goals, like we want the player to feel this, we want the player to have this type of experience. Those are the two types of goals that actually matter. Everything that follows that in the document should just be pointing back to those two goals, right? Like, we're trying to do this, and this is how we're trying to do it. The reason why this is so important is that if people understand the goals that you're trying to accomplish, they can evaluate everything in light of that. And if they disagree with the specifics of how it's being executed, they can say, okay, well, if you're trying to do this, I get what you're trying to do, but I think it would be better if we approached it this way. You're both trying to accomplish the same thing, but there's a different way to potentially do it. By the way, so most of our feature documents were under 4 pages. They were quite brief. I just worked out details with people, or we iterated as we went. It was absolutely not necessary to have 1 billion pages for our design docs. Learning the basics was very easy. Most people could get up to speed on the project very quickly. And updating it was also easy. That's the other thing, is if you have documents that are very short and to the point, when you need to update them, there's not a lot of stuff to update. It's an added benefit. So keep your document organization structure simple. This is something I think is less possible on a larger team because your documents they kind of multiply. So for Pentiment, we only had 1 layer of folders. We had a root layer in Confluence. So we had folders at the root layer, and we never, ever had another folder nested inside of another folder. Everything that is out of date was immediately taken out of the Confluence and put into a deprecated folder. The advantages of this is, 1, when you have to go multiple levels in folders, you wind up spending a lot of time just hunting around and trying to figure out where a thing is. If you have not that many documents, you can keep a flat structure, and devs can have high confidence that when they go into a folder, they know what they're going to find there. And of course, if you have easy access to thing and high visibility, it's easier to see a document that you know is no longer in date. If it's buried in a number of folders, like 3 or 4 levels deep, you will forget it exists. And when people do searches, they're going to find this thing and it's way out of date. So keep a flat structure or a very shallow structure, and then just get everything that's out of date out of there as quickly as possible. Keep it brief and focus on your goals. And the details are going to come through iteration. They kind of always do anyway, but on a small team, it just happens a lot easier. Small teams are often very socially close. This is a factor that, there's only so many people. You're working very closely with most everyone. Most of the meetings you have can be quite informal. Now, sometimes this can get out of hand, but most of your meetings can just be kind of people just talking back and forth in small groups. There are dangers to that. You should figure out a good way to distinguish between what is a meeting and what is people just shooting the shit and talking about things. Our meetings were very minimal. We had 1 meeting a week. That was a regular meeting. We had a sprint start. That was on Monday. And then the following week, we would have the sprint end on a Thursday. So 1 regular meeting, that was the only scheduled meeting that we had on a regular basis. Every morning and every evening on Slack, we would say, hey, everybody, I'm working on these things today. And it would just be a bullet point list, and it was usually very low detail. Sometimes we would put things inside of a thread, like, hey, if you want to look at what I'm working on, here it is. And then in the evening, we'd say, hey, this is what we got done. It was very important that this was not policing. This was not being done to make sure that people were, working hard enough. It was just for visibility. It was just so people understood, hey, this is what I'm working on. Because sometimes people would say, hey, I'm working on this thing, and there's either an out of spec design doc, or something had changed, or we're not ready, and someone would say, whoa, hold on, wait, stop. we got to change that. Let's see if you can work on something else. We would have typically, things would come up where we'd need to get 3 people together, And those would usually be very short, very focused meetings, usually 30 minutes or less. Anything that was larger than that needed to have an agenda. So I have very, very specific feelings about meetings that honestly make people very mad. I think a lot of devs are very used to having meetings that are very unstructured. I think they are the enemy of all joy in game development, and they should not work this way. So you should be serious about the time that people are spending in meetings, and you should actually run your meetings, not let them kind of wander around. Every meeting that you have should have a short agenda. This is really just a bullet point list. What are we trying to accomplish? What are we going to talk about? And for how long are we going to talk about it? So I'll give you an example of where this did not work. I had a meeting once with some people where they said, we're going to go over some ideas for this story. And they sent out, and it was a half-hour meeting. And I said, can you guys please write an agenda for this? And they're like, oh, it'll just be fast. I was like, oh, okay. So we get into the meeting, and they're like, we have 8 story ideas. And I said, so in 30 minutes, you're going to go over 8 story ideas, like less than 4 minutes each, and then we're going to talk about them? And they're like, oh, yeah, I guess this should have been an hour-long meeting. I'm like, you could have figured that out just thinking about it for 30 seconds, and you would have set it up in the right way and not had to rush and waste a bunch of people's time. Always save 5 minutes at the end of a meeting for a wrap-up. Do you have a plan? So you said you were trying to figure something out and accomplish something. Do you have a plan for doing it? Did something new come up? Do you have to deal with that? Make sure that everyone understands when you leave the meeting, hey, the thing that we came in to do, this is where it is now, and these are new things that we need to think about. And then document it. Again, this seems obvious, but yes, don't just assume that everyone understands. Put it in email or document. Don't just put it in Slack or Teams, because that will get lost in the sands of time. We did a lot of team activities. This is a thing that, it's nice. It's a thing that is very difficult when you have a large team. Obviously, during COVID and everyone working remotely, this was quite tricky, but we still did do a lot of team activities that helped bond the team together. It's easier with small teams. You can do these activities in person, or you can do them online. They have different advantages, obviously. A lot of what we did on Pentiment is we looked at reference games and also reference movies. We probably watched over the course of the project like 20 movies. Some of them were, feature films. Some of them were documentaries. We'd look at games that we thought were cool, games that would give us ideas, things that stylistically just felt like they vibed with the game that we were making. And we took field trips. Obviously, this only happened a couple times because of COVID. But doing this really built a lot of morale on the team, and it allowed us to have a common frame of reference. So like all the movies, all the games, like we watched Name of the Rose, we watched Andrei Rublev, we played things like Mutazione or Night in the Woods, so we could see, oh, this is what we're talking about. It's one thing to say, hey, everyone play it, but usually they're not going to play it on their own, but when you do it together, you can talk about it together. So yeah, we watched The Name of the Rose, we watched the Name of the Rose series, The Return of Martin Guerre, Andrei Rublev. Toward the end, we were really just like anything. We're like watching Black Death, which is not appropriate, really, but it was fun. At that point, it was more about team morale and bonding. And yeah, we did take we actually took 2 trips to the Getty Museum in Los Angeles. The Getty Museum has a wonderful collection of manuscripts. So we got in my van and we drove up and made a day of it. It was really fun. On a small team, you cannot adjust output very easily. So you have so many people, and those people have a very specific output. And when you realize that you're not going to hit the targets that you want, you have to either cut early or you have to staff up very early. Otherwise, it will be very disastrous. I'm going to say this. This is something that is very important on a team of any size. Nothing gets faster in production. Rather, what is important to say is you should never assume that anything will get faster in production. You can only look in retrospect and say, things are now faster. If you assume things are going to be faster, you are wrong and you are heading to hell. Do not do it. Nothing gets faster. So when you see that you're not going to make a schedule, you should believe that that's really going to happen. At about a third of the way through production or halfway through production, at the end of vertical slice, you kind of projected, based on what we did, this is how much we can do. So a third of the way through, halfway through, when you can make changes, check how long things are actually taking. You've projected you're going to get this much done in this amount of time. Is it? Are you getting that done? And then if you're not, cut your content or your features then, or staff up. So this can be done internally, this can be done externally. This is easier said than done. That's why the first option is to cut things, which is not fun, but often that's the only thing you can do. So we did make cuts and staffing changes over the course of the project. So initially, we had projected a very large number of animation rigs for the game, because we have well over 100 characters. And after our vertical slice, I was like, don't, forget it. Just put these 8 women, they're all on this one rig. My animation director thought that we were going to have 20 rigs. I'm like, no, we should have 5 rigs, that's it. So we way scaled that down. After Act 1, we had 4 murder suspects in Act 1, and that was a lot of work. And so for Act 2, we said, that took too long. In Act 2, we're just going to have 3 suspects. I don't even remember who the 4th suspect was. It doesn't matter. And the player doesn't know. Well, now you know. But it doesn't really matter. They don't know what you planned, only what's in the game. And by moving down to 3 suspects, it made our work a lot smaller for the second act. Also, we unified all of our ending sequences for the end of the act. At the end of Act 1 in Pentiment, there are execution scenes, and each one of them was a custom animation. It was very expensive. And the end of Act 2 was also expensive, but they all were one ending, so it was a lot easier for us to execute on. No pun intended. And then after Act 2, we were really behind schedule because we had overcommitted on a lot of animation resources. So I said, you know what, if we're going to get this done on time, we have to make the third act more linear. This did affect the quality. People noticed. They're like, damn, once you get into Act 3, it gets a lot more linear. You're right. We were running out of time, and I said, it's important for us to communicate these things, so let's narrow the scope here. Also, as I said, I lost my primary writer, Kate Dollarhide, for about 9 months. She left and then came back. So in that meantime, we had to hire Zoe and Merton. And then we also hired an external artist. We decided that we needed to do a lot of variations of our scene backgrounds. We decided we wanted to do a winter season, and to do that, we needed to hire an external artist to help us do that. So again, question, should you hire people internally, or should you outsource them, or do co-dev? So small teams have small budgets, so you can't just say, just hire people. It's not that easy. But you do need to get everything done that you want to get done. So if you've narrowed your scope, but you say we can't actually execute on the vision of the game unless we do this stuff, either you need more time or you need more people, which is another form of time. Contracting short-term can help. So there are certain things where you say, we can't hire someone full-time, but we can have someone come on to finish this up. A lot of potential for outsourcing. Audio and visual effects we found were very effective to outsource. I don't really believe in bringing people on super late, which I've worked on projects where audio comes on super late. I don't think it's a good idea. But if you're under the gun, people can come in later and they can finish things in a pinch. Music, all of our music was outsourced. We had a small medieval music ensemble called Alchemy. They did all of our music out of house, which is not atypical. All of our tools and utilities programming, thankfully Obsidian has a fantastic core technology group, and they have developed amazing tools for us to use. So that was technically outsourced. It was not the team doing that work. So we benefited vastly from being part of a larger company. And yes, you can have force multipliers on content. So if you can add a writer, like we added 2 writers, that made it a lot easier for us to get through. Like when you have so few people making content, if you add people who can integrate into the pipeline, even for a short amount of time, it has a much more dramatic effect compared to if you have a writing team of 8 people and you add 1 person, that's not as impactful. If you have a writing team of 2 people and you add a third, that's very impactful. Do not wait until the last minute to do this. Anyone that you bring on has to figure out your pipelines. They have to get used to communicating with you. They have to get used to integrating into your stuff. So work with them in pre-production. Develop pipelines that can handle outsourcers, because a lot of times we get very focused on how all the internal people work. Sometimes you'll have people outside of your organization, and even if you're working remotely, they don't necessarily have access to all the things that the team does, so you have to figure out how that works. Keep in touch with them throughout production, even if you're not working with them continuously, because you need to find out, hey, if we need you to come back in 6 months, would you be able to do work then? Sometimes what we found is, if we didn't do that, we'd say, we'd wait and then say, hey, we have about 2 months of work for you to do. Can you do it? And they're like, no, I'm contracted to work on something else for a year. And then you have to find another solution. So when you get to alpha, make sure everything is in. Again, it is impossible for this to be literally everything. I've yet to work on a game where 100% of everything was actually in. So this is 95 at 85. There are little, T's to be crossed and I's to be dotted, but like pretty much everything is there and it feels solid. It feels good. It's not stubbed. It feels solid, if slightly embarrassing. It is a real game. It is done. You can play it. Beta should really just be for polishing and improving the experience. You shouldn't be implementing new stuff in your beta phase. This really should strictly be just polishing it and working it out. And then release is how much can you get out of the game once it comes out. I think that I've seen a lot of small teams, and I would say the Pentiment team benefited from this as well. If you release a game, it's exhausting, right? Like making a game is a marathon. You push it out, and sometimes you go like, oh, that's it, it's out. But I've seen a lot of small teams really succeed when they put the game out, and then they still have a map for, and I'm not talking about games as a service, I just mean longer term support to keep it in public consciousness, keep players coming back to it. There are little things that you can do that make people come back because you put all that effort into making the game, and sometimes it takes very small effort to keep it going and get a lot more people to develop a long tail, basically sell the game for a very long time. So alpha, again, it's impractical to insist on 100% at 100%. You should play what you have. On a small team, everyone should play the game. Everyone should stop, and you should play the game. I hear lots of excuses on lots of teams, and like on big teams, there's a lot of things intersecting, but on a small team, you should stop, and you should all play the game and talk about how to spend your time. You're going to realize that some things are not going to fit in your deadline. There's stuff where you're like, oh, we never got this done, or like, this is really rough. We're not going to be able to take it all the way. You're going to have to cut it. You should make that decision in your alpha phase, if you haven't already. Pentiment's alpha, all of our dialogue was written, but there were a lot of problems with it, especially later in the game. We had a lot of work animations, like lots of peasants in the games, lots of people doing work animations, sweeping, milking cows, doing all sorts of things. Most of those were missing, which was very bad, and that was pushed to post-release. We just had to accept it wasn't going to get done. And our end sequence did work, but like it was not good. There's a lot that was missing from it. Also, our scenes parallaxed, which is a very minor feature, but basically the background would move at a different rate as the foreground. It's a subtle thing, but it was frustrating, but it wasn't going to get done. We talked to our artists, and they're like, we can do it, but it's actually a lot of work to separate all these things. So we just said, you know what? It's not going to happen. it looks good the way it is. It's looked good for 2 years. It'll look better later when we can add it, but we're just not going to do it right now. So beta, what is polish work and what is new? Distinguishing between these is very important. You should not be doing new work in your beta. Any feature that makes existing content better is still polish. You do have to be careful, though, because if a new feature means authoring new things, then you're getting into the territory of actually making new work. So, for example, parallaxing was work that needed to keep happening, but it was a little tricky. It's a feature, but also it's a feature that required work. So, for example, if you're saying, we're going to add a new character, we're going to add a new quest, we're going to add new dialogues, that's not polish. You're making new content. You're going counter to your goal. And sometimes you're going to find big problems and you're going to have to break the rules. Like, you've established rules for how you work and what you do, and sometimes you're going to get to the end and say, like, I don't know how to resolve this, and you kind of have to split the Gordian knot and maybe do something severe to get it across the finish line. So in Pentiment's beta, we made very significant changes to late Act 3 structurally and tonally. So I had said, we're not going to rewrite any of this, and then we had a bunch of people played it, and they were like, this sucks. Like, they thought that the first 2 acts were set up very well. They got into the 3rd act. They really did not like the tone of certain characters. There were certain key plot points. They were just like, this is not good. But other than the writing, we really only added accessibility features and small polish elements. Like I said, there were certain things we said, we're not going to get this done by launch. We'll put it in post-launch. It'll make the game better, but we can't afford to do it right now. And a lot of our focus was on localization. We really wanted, this is a game about reading. If people could not read English, it's a lot of words, there's no voiceover. So it was very important that our localization was as strong as possible, which was French, Italian, German, Spanish, Polish, and Portuguese at launch. And we had, not the craziest amount, but 300,000 words of dialogue. So we needed to make sure that that was really solid. Your release, you never know how it's going to go. So things like additional localizations or ports may extend a game's life. They really made a big difference for Pentiment. I've seen them make a huge difference for a lot of the games I've worked on. And that's one of those cases where the game is done. You already did all the hard work. If you put a little more money and coordination into it, you can reach a new audience and get more sales. And if you have good tech and pipelines, start thinking about the future. So if you made a game where you believe you figured out how to make a good game, maybe make another game that is similar to that. Now, I'm not saying just keep making the same game over and over again, but maybe it's not a fantastic idea to reinvent everything on every game that you make. So if a small game works well, has a good pipeline, you can come back to it. If you got good at doing something, try to apply it again. So Pentiment's release, it was critically very well received. Not too many bugs, thankfully. And we did continue to do more localizations. We localized into Russian, Korean, Japanese, and simplified Chinese. And I was surprised that a lot of those markets, actually, we sold a lot of units in them, which was kind of shocking to me. Did help sales a lot. Also, we were able to take a lot of the text and accessibility work that we did. So we did a lot of accessibility work on this game, especially when it came to text. And we were able to carry that over to future games, which is fantastic. Oh, I blew-bassed my own end slide. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We have some time for a few questions, if you like.
Yep. We got a couple minutes here. 8 minutes and 21, 20, 19. Hello.
Hello. Thank you for this amazing lecture.
Thank you.
And making so great game. My question is if I remember well, your game development took like 3 years, and during this time, I'm totally sure that you were thinking about basically, are our players going to like the game? And I suppose you did something like play tests or demo or showing it to players. In my team, we have lots of problems connected with that because on one side, with a small team, you don't want to waste time for making like release for like here for Digital Dragons. But at the same time, it's great to be able. So, what is your approach to that?
So, if you're working with a publisher, then have the publisher help you with that. Because there's now, what I mean by that is often publishers, because they do work with so many teams, they will be experienced at getting people to come in and do play tests. Obviously, there's still work on the side of the development team to get something ready for them to play. But we've done playtests at Obsidian where we handle everything, and it's a huge amount of work. And when it's something where, for example, Xbox handles the playtests, it's still work for us, but it's like less than half the amount of work. So it's a way for us to get the feedback that we really need from a company where it's very routine for them. You know, like playtesting is not something that teams necessarily do constantly with external groups. So relying on a publisher can be or maybe just a research group, can be a very handy way to get feedback on stuff when the team just doesn't have the bandwidth to do all that work on their own.
Okay, and how often did you do
How often?
Yeah.
I think we did like 3 total external playtests. We had one that was after the end of our first act, and that was kind of a vibe check, like, do you kind of just like the game in general? And then we had, like toward the end of development, we had people play through the whole game, and that's where we got a lot of feedback that was like, this is bad. Like, this is really, like the ending was bad. And then we rewrote a bunch of stuff, and then we have more people play through it, some who replayed through it, so that we could get that feedback to say like, okay, you got it. And there was also stuff that we realized in there where identifying our audience was super important because it's a game about reading, right? Like, do you like the art? Do you like reading? Do you like history? If you don't, this is not going to be a game for you. That's okay. But if the people who liked the idea of it didn't like it, then we were in big trouble. So it wasn't about making sure that we were hitting a mass market because the game was never going to hit a mass market, and most small games are never going to hit a mass market. So it was about saying, for people who like the concept, the idea of the game, is this working, and how many of those people really are there, as far as we can tell. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks for the talk.
Thank
you mentioned that you begin the sprints at Monday and end at Thursday. I was wondering what you and the team do on the Friday and why such decision to make this one day.
Yeah, so it was a 2-week sprint, but we would end on Thursday, so that Friday was kind of a free day. So the idea was that Fridays at the end of a sprint, between the sprints, were a day for you to kind of just not do whatever you wanted, but you're not bound by the sprint, really. So if you want to play the game, if you want to fix bugs, if you want to like put in a little thing that you didn't quite get to, Friday was sort of clear for you. Also, a lot of people would like to maybe take vacation on Friday, so they didn't have to worry. Like, basically, we're like, the week is done. And so Friday is a day for you to do the things that you want to do. And if that means taking the day off so you can start your weekend early, then you don't have to feel bad about missing the end of the sprint.
Really nice idea. Thank you.
Thank you. Not my idea, by the way. That was my producer.
Thank you for the lecture. Just one quick question. What do you think about using boards like Miro instead of Confluence documentations?
You should use whatever your team is comfortable with. We started, back at Black Isle, we just had Word documents, and that was located in some sort of source control. Yeah. I can't remember what it was, but then we were in SharePoint. We were in SharePoint for quite a while, and then now we're in Confluence. And I think whatever the team is comfortable with, okay. If it allows you to structure it in a way that's easy to access and iterate on, it's fine.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Hi, thank you for the lecture. One of the most practical for me, at least during the Digital Dragons. So I wasn't here from the beginning, so maybe you were saying about it, but Can you tell us how long was the pre-production?
Pre-production was 9 months.
9 months.
Yeah, it was 9 months, and then the development was 2 years and 3 months. So in total, it was a 3-year development cycle.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.